now and start the webinar now. So Alex, you may begin.
Okay, I'll call to order the Transportation Advisory Board meeting for May of 2023. The first thing we have on our agenda is the approval of minutes from our April meeting. It sounds like there are some finishing touches going into those. And so I'll probably have to get to that next month. Third agenda item is public comments. Do we have any members of the public on the call right now?
Now we have 2 members.
Okay. If any member of the public is interested in addressing the board about a transportation matter, you'll have up to 3 minutes to do so. If you're interested in speaking, please use the raise hand feature within the Zoom application.
And Alex, before we go to public comment, I'll grab a few meeting notes, but I'm going to start sharing screens. Let me know if you can see.
Yep, I can see that.
All right. Hello, everyone. We're pleased to have you join us. To strike a balance between meaningful, transparent engagement and online security, the following rules will be applied. This meeting has been called to conduct the business of the City of Boulder. Activities that disrupt, delay, or otherwise interfere with the meetings are prohibited. The time for speaking is limited to 3 minutes. No person shall speak except when recognized by myself, and no person shall speak longer than the time allotted. Each person shall register to speak at the meeting using their real name. Any person believed to be using a name other than the one commonly known by, they will not be permitted to speak. Please use the raise hand function to be able to speak. No video will be permitted except for city officials, employees, and invited speakers and presenters. All others will participate by voice only. The person presiding at the meeting shall enforce these rules by muting anyone who violates any rules. The Q&A function is enabled. It will be used for individuals to communicate with myself. It should be used for technical online platform related questions only. Only the host and individuals designated by the host will be permitted to share their screen during the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. At this time, we'll welcome any hands if any members of the public are interested in addressing the board during
recording in progress.
All right, it looks like we have 2 hands. Lynn, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. And if you can confirm that you are able to do so.
I'm intimidated from even speaking. Seriously. To just put that, so someone has to check it off before they speak. You shouldn't be doing that each time because it turns people away. It's intimidating to hear all that. It really is. It's not right to do that. Now I'll give my statement. But, you know, after that, it makes me in a pretty grumpy mood. It really does. You should feel what it's like to have someone read the riot act to you before you speak. Now, Pharmaca is gone from Pearl Street. Pharmaca is now gone from Ideal. And they're building Alpine Balsam. So what's the deal here? How does transportation have any say here with the planning board and with planning in general for Boulder about 15-minute neighborhoods when it's perfectly allowable that they get outpriced for the drugstores? And much less should we have, you know, a fix-it store. No, nobody fixes anything anymore, right? You know, so for people to have disposable income to be able to pay for all the transportation costs of this town, I think these are things to think about, because if everyone has to jump in their car each time they're going to the drugstore because they can't walk to their local one, that's a problem. You need to be speaking to the planning department about getting zoning for specific businesses. Small hardware stores, oftentimes you need a little thing, you know, we need little micro stores all over. And this should be the demand management reduction strategy for the transportation department. I mean, I'm not telling you, you know, I'm sure you're so insulted because of course you know all this, right? But I don't see anything like this happening. I see the opposite happening. So I'm asking you, you're the transportation department. Why is this allowed to happen? How can this happen that we lose our drugstores? How? Tell me, I know it's a one-way conversation, isn't it? Yep, I get it. And I can email everything else that I miss saying. Sure. And I'll never hear back either. And I don't hear back when I see my drugstore gone. Especially when they're building, 900 new places across the street for people to use that drugstore. We've got a service problem here in Boulder, and it's your problem because you're the transportation department. Done.
Thank you, Lynn.
Alexi, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me, Veronica?
Yes, a little
All right.
faint, but if you speak closer to them, it should work.
Got it.
Cool.
Alexi Davies, speaking for Community Cycles. With regards to the update of section 2.03Q of the DCS, we appreciate the improvements to the existing process. However, we have a few major concerns. The first one is limiting the hazards assessment to the high-risk network and the racial equity areas. This is not Vision Zero. This part of the proposal actually weakens the city's ability to request a potential crash analysis or hazard assessment. The new proposal, not covered by all of Boulder, not covering all of Boulder, does not follow Vision Zero principles. If a project meets the thresholds of a traffic study, a hazardous assessment should be performed. The second item was planning and development should not be making transportation decisions for our streets. We understand the transportation department is consulted currently on decisions, but transportation should have the ultimate decision on hazard assessment and mitigations because they are the entity with the expertise in this area. The third item, consultants should not determine what constitutes feasible mitigation. Transportation staff should play a primary role in the mitigations, ensuring that the current best practices are consistently applied. This is both to avoid a potential conflict of interest for the consultant, as well as some consultants appear to not be up on the latest practices. For example, with this Grandview traffic study, it took the consultant 3 times with the traffic study to include bike and ped counts. They used the word accident, and they could not determine if there would be potential crashes for the left turn into Grandview across 2 lanes of traffic, the bike path and the ped path. Decisions on hazard assessments and mitigations should rest with the transportation department. Thanks for all your work, guys.
Thanks, Alexi. It does not look like any other members of the public have their hand up. So Alex, I will send it back to you.
Thanks, Alexi. Thanks, Veronica. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 4, which is the introduction to the capital improvement program for this year.
Good evening. I'm Garrett Slater, and I am the Capital Projects Manager for Engineering Manager for the Transportation and Mobility Department. And I'm joined this evening by 2 of my associates in the Capital Projects Division. I am excited to be presenting here with you this evening with Lindsay and Brian. So Lindsay Mers is currently a principal engineering project manager and has been with the city for about 11 years and has functioned the majority of that time as a project manager implementing major capital improvement projects for the transportation department. And Brian Wiltshire has also been with the city for 11 years and has also been responsible for implementing a number of significant capital improvement projects over his tenure here at the city. And so I know many of you have heard me provide capital improvement presentation program presentation overviews a number of times. Tila, you've probably gotten really sick of hearing from me over the years. So I am happy to have some other folks here to present with me, to break up hearing from me so often, and also expose them to a little bit of the excitement of the process of developing the CIP with you, our partners at TAB. So I am going to go ahead and turn on my slides here, and there we go. And all right. So we're going to talk about what a capital improvement program is, talk a little about the funding, and then provide a review of the already adopted and approved programs and projects in the 23 to 28 CIP. And then we'll talk about next steps and be happy to discuss your questions. So the capital improvement program is the way that the Transportation and Mobility Department implements the Transportation Master Plan and accomplishes the number of goals and objectives that we've outlined for ourselves, and is primarily currently focused on the delivery of the core arterial network. And
Jared,
so,
I don't believe you're seeing slides at the moment.
oh goodness, okay, thank you for pointing that out. I thought that I was sharing. Is it showing slides? Okay, there we go. Looks like it is
You're
sharing.
good.
Okay, great, thank you. So the analogy that I like to use of relating what a CIP is that similar to taking care of a home, routine maintenance, which is you're sweeping, doing the dishes, vacuuming, shoveling the snow. Those are functions that are handled on a city and department level through our operational budgets. And so the operations team, which was responsible for signals and markings, as well as pothole filling and snow removal, are the routine maintenance functions that are addressed by the operational and annual budget. That is planned each year annually. Capital improvement projects are akin to replacing a roof on your house, or perhaps adding a deck, or adding an additional bedroom, or dare I say an ADU? Is that okay to say that in this context? That's representative of what a capital improvement project or program is. And it's a significant expenditure, typically greater than $50,000. And they are focused into projects as well as ongoing programs. And we make these investments because we have billions of dollars of assets in that comprise our transportation infrastructure. And so we make these investments consistent with the principles and policies found in the 2019 Transportation Master Plan, which is first, the highest level of being focused on system operations and maintenance, Vision Zero, and travel safety. Second is operational improvements and enhancement of the transit, pedestrian, and bicycle system, person carrying capacity improvements, electrification, and formerly the neighborhood speed management program. And then the lowest priority would be representative of quality of life improvements, such as sound wall mitigation. So I would also like to introduce this as a new slide, which we have not focused on in years prior. So this will be used as a framework for the draft CIP that we will present to you at the June meeting. And that is that the city is requiring all of our proposed projects to be scrutinized through the sustainability, equity, and resiliency framework. And so we need to identify which of the key goals and objectives of the SER our projects are aligning with, whether they be safe, healthy and thriving, livable, accessible and connected, environmentally sustainable, or economically vital.
Garrett, what does livable high mean?
I just recognize that's a typo. It's just supposed to
Okay.
be livable.
Okay,
Apologize.
thank you.
Yes.
I struggled with that today.
Yes. So the CIP that you all were a part of approving last year for 23 to 28 represents an $88 million total investment with $10 million in grants. And the average over each year is 13 million, with programs comprising the majority of that funding at about $8 million per year. The bulk of our funding comes through the sales tax revenue, which is directed towards the transportation fund. as well as the gas tax. We also, the gas tax that flows from federal to state and then down to local agencies is also known as the Highway Users Trust Fund, or the HUTF. And so we get that funding based on the number of centerline miles that are in the city each year. And then we also have other revenues such as grants and development funds that come through the Transportation Development Fund, and they comprise about 10% of our annual CIP. And then the Boulder Junction Fund, which is sunset for the time being, historically has provided enhancements and funding opportunities inside the Boulder Junction Transit Village area. As a number of you know, we are very proactive as an organization at pursuing grant funding. The types of funding that we have been successful at obtaining funding this year, as well as in prior years, is the Transportation Improvement Program through the Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, which allows us to pursue safety funding through CDOT, or the Colorado Department of Transportation, as well as pursuing Transportation Alternatives Program funding, which we recently submitted 3 applications for to help us make multimodal enhancements around the community and on the CAN, as well as Safe Routes to School, which you should have seen some recent publicity around us receiving funding for the Manhattan Middle School. So we continue to be successful at identifying and pursuing grant opportunities through these well-known sources. And we are also being mindful to be aware of and pursue new federal opportunities, the most prominent of these being the Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A. So we know there's a lot of interest in the community with the SS4A opportunity, and we are intending to pursue an implementation grant through the SS4A opportunity. Applications are due July 10th, and so we are in the development phase of preparing our initial draft application, and excited to see what opportunities that might bring. And there are a variety of other opportunities for implementing resilient, smart, and safe infrastructure that we will continue to be mindful of and pursuing on a national and federal basis. So no surprise to you all, inflation is in the news everywhere, and no place is that more present than in the construction marketplace here in Colorado, especially. And this is a simple graphic that we've shared in times past that shows the difficulty of keeping up with inflation when you have 5% versus 10%, and the eroding purchasing power of the dollar each year as inflation reduces our ability to keep up. And if you look at the last 4 years of where the inflation levels have been, we were in sort of a normal market in 2019 with about 5%. And then we saw a dip in 2020 as the market sort of reacted to the year of COVID, and a lot of uncertainty, and prices actually went down. Then we saw a substantial jump in 2021 and an even greater jump in 2020, which makes it really tough for us to be able to make all the level of investment that we would like into our system as the cost of delivering these projects and services and programs increases each year. So within the CIP, we are focused, as I mentioned, on projects as well as programs. The majority of the capital improvement program is focused on the multimodal programs. And at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Lindsay to talk about the multimodal programs, and then we'll have Brian talk about the project. So Lindsay, are you ready?
I am ready. Thanks, Garrett. Okay, so this table lists the overall view of how we allocated funding to these various programs in the 2023 to 2028 transportation CIP, and includes sidewalk and pedestrian programs, multi-use path programs, pavement management program, the major capital reconstruction program, which also includes the bridge asset management program, the deficient streetlight pole replacement program, Vision Zero, and the core arterial network. It should be noted that those programs that are on this table that are highlighted in yellow have been discontinued, with all of their funding being reallocated to the recently adopted core arterial network. And so now I'll step through some of these programs in more detail. So Garrett, the next slide. So the city has a pavement management program to prioritize the safety and preservation of the transportation system, including maintaining the approximately 300 miles of the street system, which includes inspecting and rating all streets on a 3-year interval to maintain awareness of the existing conditions and to guide where we'll do pavement repairs in the years to come. The pavement management program is identified in the TMP as a priority 1 investment. And the PMP works to leverage the proposed improvements identified through the efforts of Vision Zero and the core arterial network planning. And so to do this, the Mobility Enhancements Initiative is part of the pavement management program, which incorporates bicycle and pedestrian facility improvements into the annual pavement resurfacing work. And this will help make streets safer for walking and biking. And so the idea is, since the pavement management program is repaving the streets, there's an opportunity to change the organization of the street section, and we can add improvements for bicycles. And some recent examples of this were the Folsom Iris to Valmont and the Lehigh resurfacing projects, where we added the buffered bike lanes on both projects. So the PMP uses the OCI score to prioritize the work. So all of the city's streets are rated on a scale of 1 to 100, and they use the overall condition index, which is also known as the OCI. And so this number is used to determine the priority of the funding and to guide where and how those repairs should be made, this year and in future years. So scores above 75 indicate a pavement is structurally adequate. Between 45 and 75, it indicates that there might be an additional structure that's required, and those that rate below 45 generally require full replacement. And so the city's PMP strives to maintain a system-wide goal of an average OCI rating of 75 or higher, which is given the classification of good condition. This slide also lists the multimodal distributions for the pavement management program, which is 50% focused on roadway, 10% transit, 20% each on the pedestrian and the bicycle. So Garrett, the next slide. So, excuse me, the pedestrian focus programs in the city include the pedestrian facilities enhancements for missing sidewalk links and connections, and then enhancements at crossing treatments. It also includes the pedestrian facilities repair and replacement program and the sidewalk maintenance program. And so these programs are 100% dedicated to pedestrian movement. The sidewalk maintenance budget funds the miscellaneous sidewalk repair program, which shares sidewalk repairs in the city with property owners who pay for half of the repair costs for those sidewalks that are adjacent to their property. The pedestrian facilities budget's an ongoing funding program, and it includes installing missing sidewalk links and even doing pedestrian crossing and safety treatments. Some of the crossing treatment improvements that you could see citywide would be like medium refuge islands, crosswalk lighting, flashing signs, neck down, signing, lighting, pedestrian signals. So these programs are identified in the TMP as a priority 1 investment, and the various implementation locations are prioritized each year using condition level and then other program guidance documents. The next slide. So the multi-use path programs include the multi-use path enhancement budget and the multi-use path capital maintenance budget. And so these programs are dedicating to enhancing and maintaining the currently 80 plus miles of path within the city to meet the needs for both pedestrians and bicycles. And the maintenance budget's charged with providing major maintenance to off-street multi-use paths. This addresses such activities like we'll replace concrete panels, do floodproofing on underpasses, I've redecked pedestrian overpasses. So that's included on the maintenance budget. The enhancement budget is used to expand on the current path system. So we build new paths, or sometimes we'll convert existing sidewalks into paths. And so these programs are identified in the TMP as also as a priority 1 investment. And these various projects are prioritized through condition level, through our pedestrian bridge inspection reports and maintenance frequency. Next one. So the major capital reconstruction program is largely purposed for the bridge asset management program, and that program provides funding to repair our existing major and minor structures and bridge assets that are close to or at the end of their useful life. And so this funding is important because it provides the ability to complete these capital repairs that we are not typically eligible for grant funding. So such tasks like we line existing culvert pipes, we apply waterproofing membranes on existing bridge structures, we complete other structure repairs to concrete and steel. And I also want to note here that when you think of minor and major structures, don't only include the more commonly seen like roadway bridges or ped bridges, but these also include like all of our box culverts and all of the pipes that are found under the roads. And so this program is identified in the TMP as a priority 1 investment, and the Bridge Health Index is used to prioritize this work. And so that index it's a bridge performance measure that we use to rate the overall health of the structures, and it's a rating of between 1 to 10. And the multimodal distribution for this program is 55% roadway, 15 pedestrian, 15 bicycle, and 15 transit. And so now I'm going to pass it to Brian to talk about the project.
Thanks, Lindsay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Wiltshire, and I'm a principal project manager in the Transportation Mobility Group, and I'm primarily responsible for implementing the CIP projects, and I'll be covering the Transportation CIP projects portion of tonight's presentation. Transportation CIP project slide is presenting the projects currently in the planning phase. Projects that are in construction, such as the North Broadway reconstruction project and the 30th and Colorado underpass aren't shown since they've already been funded. So the table that you're seeing is the budgeted amount for each project and in which year the funding will be received. The multimodal distribution is also shown for each of those projects. Garrett, next slide, please. The Transportation Development CIP slide identifies the different capital projects that are funded through the Development CIP and how they're allocated for the years 23 through 2028. These projects include signal maintenance, TIP local match, TMP implementation, development coordination, and the 28th and Colorado Protected Intersection project that's been presented to TAB in previous meetings. The multimodal distribution has also been included for each of these projects. Garrett, next slide, please. All right. The TIP, local match, and TMP implementation slide discusses the various funding sources such as Safe Streets and Roads for All, Reconnecting Communities pilot program, and Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation, and in which years that the local match is being provided for. As we receive funding for the specific projects, the match comes out of the $3 million average yearly allocation and goes into each specific project. So for instance, that's why the funding in 2023 shows up as only $650,000. It's also important to note that the funding that's been identified is for soft costs such as planning, design, and staff costs, and also the hard costs, which is the construction of materials side of the project. Garrett, next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a few key projects, not the entire CIP list, but especially the ones of broader interest to the public. The first project is the 28th and Colorado Protected Intersection project. This project came directly out of the 30th Street and Colorado Avenue Corridor Study project that was completed back in 2018. This project represents TMP investment priorities 1 and 2. Construction of this project is anticipated to begin in the summer fall of 2023, with total funding for the project at $4.3 million, and of that $3.1 million coming from multiple grants. In this case, it was Revitalizing Main Streets, CCRS, and CMAQ funding. This project is also part of the Core Arterial Network. Unfortunately, what you're seeing, the concept plan that's shown is a little bit outdated, but the final design has been updated for the northwest corner to eliminate the right turn bypass that you're seeing. So unfortunately, we just didn't have a current graphic of that to share tonight. Garrett, next slide, please. Okay. The second project is the 30th Street Multimodal Enhancements Project. This project likewise came directly out of the 30th Street and Colorado Avenue Corridor Study project completed back in 2018. Project represents TMP investment priorities 1 and 2. Construction of the project is anticipated to begin summer fall of 2023. Total funding for the project at $6.2 million, with $4.8 million of that coming from various grants, including CCRS. also part of the core arterial network. Garrett, next slide, please. Okay. The RTOT Communications and Signal Enhancements Project represents the city investment in Vision Zero and Smart City initiatives. These projects are an effort to implement smart and resilient signal infrastructure throughout the city. Construction of these enhancements is expected to take place in 2023 and 2024. RTOT funding is 1.4 million total, with about 1.1 million of that coming from grant opportunities. The Safer Signals also has funding with the amount of 554,000 and 435,000 of that coming from grants. Garrett, next slide, please. The HSIP Vision Zero Signal Reconstruction Project represents funding for Vision Zero enhancements and capital maintenance at 3 different signal locations. These include the intersections of Baseline Mohawk, Baseline Broadway, and Folsom Pine. Construction of these improvements are expected to begin in 2023. Funding for these signal enhancements and maintenance comes in at 1.1 million, with 1 million of that coming from federal grants. Garrett, next slide, please. All right, next up, we have the East Arapahoe Multi-Use Path and Transit Stops project. The goal of this project is to enhance the multi-use paths and connect the missing links to help complete the network. This project represents TMP investment priorities 1 and 2. The project or construction of the project is anticipated to begin in the summer of 23 with the undergrounding of the overhead electric lines, followed immediately by the construction of the multi-use path and transit improvements in 2024. Total funding for this project comes in at 1.9 million, with 760,000 of that coming from a federal CMAQ grant. Garrett, next slide. And the last 2 projects are the Downtown Boulder Station and 14th and Canyon Signal replacement projects. The goal of these projects is to improve pedestrian crossing safety and bus operations through signal improvements and enhance through transit through additional bus capacity. The Downtown Boulder Station project represents TMP investment priorities 1 and 2. Construction of this project is anticipated to begin in 2023, with total funding for the project at 982,000 and 593,000 coming from grants. Funding for the 14th and Canyon improvements is 650,000, with construction expected to start in 2025. Garrett, that concludes my portion.
All right. So next steps in the process is we will come back and visit TAB in June to present the draft 24 to 29 CIP. And this is where TAB will fulfill their city charter, city code purpose of helping to inform the overall CIP. And then we will also come back to TAB again at the July meeting, where there will be a public hearing and a recommendation that will be requested by TAB from staff to be carried forward to planning board. And then the entire citywide CIP will be presented at planning board in August. And then from there, we will visit city council in September and October, where the CIP will be presented and reviewed by city council as a part of the overall citywide budget. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Garrett. And it was great hearing from Lindsay and Brian. Does anyone TAB have any questions for staff?
Brian has his hands raised.
Brian, go ahead.
Garrett, Lindsay, and Brian, thank you very much. I have a question just for my background knowledge, and maybe others too that aren't engineers or planners. Lindsay, you're covering up in the excuse me, on this, forgot the terminology with on the surfacing work. There's an OCI metric or a framework. My question is, I think I heard that this is kind of the main performance issue with the OCI. So with respect to the quality of the road surfacing, the main performance issue is like just the OCI in terms of like that number. And if you are below it, it becomes a priority anywhere. And if you're above it, it's not. So I guess I'm wondering if I got that exactly right. And also, are there other dimensions? For example, are there certain locations or corridors or places where it's more sensitive to not having high enough OCI? I'm just trying to make sense of how you do that.
So I'll respond to that, Ryan. So the pavement program is managed by James Smith, who I will probably need to get here to a TAB meeting sooner than later, so you can meet him as well. And the pavement management team uses a variety of treatments based off where the OCI is at on a particular street. So if, like Lindsay indicated, our target OCI is 75. If a particular street is perhaps in the low 60s, mid 60s, that street would be a great candidate for a chip seal, which is where there is an asphalt tack layer placed along with aggregate material on top of it. And that is a treatment that can be done at a fraction of the cost of a mill and repaving of the street. Once it starts to get below 50, that's where we look to do the full milling and then repaving. And then there are a variety of locations that on a particular street might be good for what we call a crack seal. So you can have some sections or segments of street corridors that would benefit from having those crack seals where you have varying degrees of OCI. And the goal is to try to optimize just the amount of treatment to preserve the pavement life as much as possible. If you pave a new street and do absolutely nothing to it, it will start to degrade after 7 to 10 years. And so the goal is to try to touch every street in the city, at least in some capacity, whether crack seal, chip seal, or overlay, once every 10 years. Might not always happen, because if we know there's a water main replacement happening, we will hold off on treating that street until the water main replacement happens. Or if we know that there is a major corridor study happening on a particular corridor, we might hold off on paving that one until we know the outcome of a said corridor study. And so there are a variety of factors that go into the type of treatment and when those treatments are delivered.
Okay, so I think what I'm getting a picture now then is it's more of a description of an average kind of condition over some segment of the road. It's not like there's this one pothole. You sort of treat that separately. You do spot repairs.
Right. So individual potholes, of course, are representative of a poor condition street. And so you can call and to the city or use the Inquire Boulder where you can report a pothole, and then the maintenance team will go out and fill that pothole. But a street with a lot of potholes would typically have a lower OCI, and it would likely be a strong candidate for being repaid in the next few years.
Okay, I think I got it. Thank you. I was sort of trying to understand how, if you think of bikeways, if they're graded any differently than OCI, but I suppose it makes sense intuitively that if it's an average condition over a length, then it sounds like it's the similar kind of a formula. Okay. Are you willing to take any feedback, or should I hold that for June? I have one thing.
Absolutely open to feedback.
Okay, great. So this is great overall. I was looking at the multimodal distribution pie charts, and I know that I think it was last spring, we spent quite a bit of time on this, and I think ended up TAB members talked a lot and sort of talked with each other, and just, I think we sort of ended up saying like, doesn't feel like we it was it sufficiently explained what seemed to matter, but we also didn't really come up with anything else. So I guess I would just offer, I did think of something after that I'm remembering now, like I've sort of been carrying, so I'll just offer it. And I know that this stuff seems like it's pretty well baked, but maybe just on this topic as you have time. To me, I think that when I look at I forgot what the different breakdowns are for the different elements, but you've got what, bike, pedestrian, transit, and roadway, and they add up to 100%. I think it's like, those numbers don't seem very meaningful because it's not like there's an ideal number for any of those, I think, that anybody could say. But I think if I were to consider it in terms of the percentage of completion of the network for that mode, it gets a little more interesting. So for example, you could pretty much drive anywhere in Boulder safely with a small kid. So the road network is basically 100%, maybe 99 or something percent. But if you say, what about taking a bus from anywhere in Boulder? There's some really good bus coverage, but then there's places where it would take an hour to get a few miles. And then if you ask it for bike, how many places, what percentage of Boulder can you cover? Could a 10-year-old safely ride on a bike? That number goes down quite a bit. And so if I think it might be a more interesting way to show sort of like what we're doing modally. This is more than the surfacing, right? This is like kind of a bigger picture. But anyway, I just think that might, for the layperson, for the typical elected official or the public, if they see these numbers, they might think, oh, like, wow, we're doing lots of percentage work, high percentage on bikes. But if they saw said, actually, we have 100% bike road coverage, but actually the bike, as far as like places you can travel, however you might define that network, and I know we have experts here who could probably help. I think that'd be more interesting. But in any case, I'm not proposing you rework any of that stuff at this moment, but I had to share that, seeing this nice work of yours come out. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ryan. As we know that it's more helpful when we're presenting this information to have a narrative that's meaningful, and sometimes the facts and figures just kind of get lost. And so we will certainly explore ways we might consider that as a way of telling the story.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. Any other questions for staff?
Tila has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Tila.
Thank you. Where's my microphone? I have a question that does not necessarily need an answer right now, but the portion talking about the bridge fund reminded me, I think, sorry, there's a bridge at the end of, it's basically a pedestrian bridge, and I think it's where Concord dead heads into 9th Street, I believe. Garrett, I think that Kurt had said he had spoken to you about that particular bridge, but it is, whatever the condition is, the bridge has collapsed and is unusable. It seems that there has been a decision to not replace or repair it. And so I definitely have questions about it next month when you come with the draft. But just when we're talking about maintaining the system being the top priority, unless it's just pedestrian infrastructure, seems to be the answer. And I'm hoping that when you come back next month, you'll have a better answer than that, and maybe a little bit more backstory on that bridge, if you know the one that I'm talking about.
I'm well aware of the 9th and Concord Bridge over the irrigation. Yes, we'd be happy to provide more information next month, Tila.
Great, thank you.
Becky and Trini, feel free to hop in if you have anything.
I don't have any questions. Thanks.
I don't have any questions. I just added a link to some additional funding that you guys may want to look into if you're not aware of it. I'm sure you are, but I just always like to provide whatever I've recently come into. So
The Highway Safety Improvement Program.
yeah, that
It looks like they mentioned 3 locations, Broadway and Baseline, Folsom and Pine, and maybe one other. Is that correct, Garrett?
That's correct. And at next month's meeting, you will learn of a new location at University and Broadway that we have HSIP funding for.
Great.
What was the other location I missed?
Let's see, there was Broadway, Baseline and Mohawk, and Folsom and Pine.
Okay, thanks. I don't think I have anything else, so thanks, Garrett and team.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll move to agenda item number 5, which is matters. First matters from staff. I believe Garrett, you might be up first with the DCS 2.03Q traffic crashes update.
Yes, I'll go ahead and get that one queued up. All right, it says I'm sharing, so hopefully you can see the screen.
You're good.
All right, thank you. All right, so we are here to provide an update on the 2.03Q section of the DCS, and our agenda is to talk about the background and then the proposed hazard assessment process and then the proposed changes to the DCS. So to start, I thought it might be helpful to review what the design and construction standards are for. So we have 2 prevailing documents that we use to guide design and building and construction in the city. The city code is one, which is sort of the laws, if you will, and tells us how and where and the orientation and organization of streets and rights of way. But the DCS gets far more specific and tells us that if we're going to have a sidewalk, that sidewalk should be a certain dimension, it should be comprised of a certain material, that it should be certain widths and certain slopes, and also have detectable warning surfaces at crossing locations. Whereas the city code is much more macro level in its focus and says streets should have sidewalks, and that's about the extent of it. So the DCS is very detailed and specific in the type of content it prescribes for the construction of right-of-way improvements. So it regulates private infrastructure that connects to or impacts public infrastructure. It ensures the comprehensive design and construction of adequate and functional public improvements. So basically checking the box of both private investment and public investment, and supports the health, safety, and welfare of the community. So the DCS was originally adopted in July 1998 and was most recently adopted in 2022. You probably recall around this time last year, we were going through the process of updating the DCS to be consistent with the low stress walk and bike network, providing provisions in the DCS for making street geometry and infrastructure more compatible with the implementation of the low stress bike network, the walk network, as well as the core arterial network. So as we were going through the process of updating the DCS at City Council in December of last year, there was an amendment that was made by Council that asked staff to go back and make a modification to the crash section of traffic studies found in 2.03Q. And specifically, the Council asked staff to find ways to make improvements to that language that spoke to enhancements that were consistent with the Transportation Master Plan, the Racial Equity Plan, and Vision Zero. And so we know that in order for it to be consistent with Vision Zero, the goal there is to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes, that we want it to be proactive in implementing traffic safety countermeasures in conjunction with new developments, as well as focus on high-risk patterns and locations. Okay, so the primary focus of this hazard assessment section is to reduce hazards for public transit operations, for people with disabilities, people walking, people bicycling, people using a mobility device or scooter, and also for people driving. The current language of section 203Q is found here, and I won't read this, but I think the key sentence here that was in question is sentence number 2, that speaks to the director shall specify whether crash analyses are needed for each traffic study. And there was a desire to be more specific with that language so that it wasn't so open-ended, but followed a much more rigorous protocol that as developments come in for review, that the design teams and their traffic engineering consultants could employ to make sure that the backwards as well as forward-looking process of identifying hazards could be more consistent. Oh, and I forgot there was a highlighted section there already. Okay. All right, so the proposed process for how we went about this. We know that according to the DCS, a traffic study is not warranted unless that particular development generates more than 100 vehicles for non-residential or greater than 20 for residential. So that's the trips that are being generated by that site. That's the first threshold. Then our next proposed threshold, and this is the change that goes into the decision-making, is we know that there's a high-risk network that is an outcome of the Vision Zero action plan. So if the development has an immediate frontage on a high-risk network street, that should trigger the need for the hazard assessment. And the racial equity index has been recently mapped by the city. And so we have the city divided into areas scored between 1 and 5, with 1 being the lowest priority and 5 being the highest priority. So anywhere in the community that has been identified as a racial equity index location of 4 or 5 will also trigger the hazard assessment as part of the traffic study process. So a little bit more on the high-risk network. Some of this should be familiar to you. So the high-risk network represents road with the most frequent and severe crashes, and roads where there is a high risk for crashes, even if there are currently 0 reported crashes. So trying to build in a forward-looking component to that. So the city analyzed 61 contextual factors to understand what conditions lead to the most frequent and severe crashes. And the high-risk network and found 6 risk factors. The high-risk network identifies road segments with at least 5 of these risk factors. So those risk factors are the presence of a multi-use path, daily vehicle traffic between 5 to 10,000 vehicles, signalized intersections, major intersections with no traffic signals, businesses and a mix of land uses present, and 85% of vehicle speeds of 30 miles per hour or faster. So those are the 6 risk factors that go into that high-risk network. And here is the high-risk network mapped. Not surprisingly, it's most of the major arterials in the city. And you'll also note that a lot of these overlap with the core arterial network that we're focusing a lot of our efforts on right now. And then looking at the mapping of the racial equity index, again, the decision and the recommendation here is that we're going to focus on the intermediate, high priority, and the high priority areas, which are depicted in the light red and dark red on the map you see. So when you overlay the high-risk network and the racial equity priority areas, what you'll find is a large proportion of the city where developments are likely to occur, where there would trigger the need for a traffic study, is going to trigger the need for conducting a hazard assessment, because we've got most of the city covered with each of these features. And if you take a look at the map, the areas that are not covered tend to be more of your lower density residential type of land uses. Let's see. And there was, okay. So after considering the existing conditions, the process would be to look at the fatal and serious injury crash patterns over the prior 5 years, to look at existing and planned transportation network, traffic control and signals, and the multimodal trip generation and volumes. Then the analysis would entail looking at would the development exacerbate existing crash patterns or create potentially hazardous conditions, and consider all of the aspects that we mentioned on the prior slide about transit operations, people walking, bicycling, using a mobility device, and people driving. Am I, my slideshow, I'm not sure, I should be showing the potentially hazardous conditions. Is that what you're seeing? Okay.
You are.
all right. Okay, it hiccuped on me there for a moment, so I wasn't sure. Thank you. So what are the potentially hazardous conditions? So this is not an exhaustive list, but you can see the variety, and I won't read through all of these, but increases vehicular volumes crossing sidewalks, paths, or trails, increases the number of travel lanes, increases crossing distances. So these are the types of additional hazardous conditions that could be present. And again, these may be identified at the director's discretion. So mitigation. So there are a number of ways to use proven safety countermeasures, be it through the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO guidelines. There are other documents out there from the Federal Highway Administration on various types of crash mitigation treatments that can be used. And so if a potentially hazardous condition is identified, the applicant must identify and implement various mitigation measures as included in these types of documents. So, for example, using medians and pedestrian refuge islands, backplates with retroreflective borders, and using leading pedestrian intervals at traffic signal turning movement locations. So we have a flow chart here that shows what this would look like on a given development project. So there first, again, is the question of, does the development create the trips that generate the threshold for the need for a traffic study? If yes, then does it immediately frontage on a high-risk network, and or does it is it located in a block group with an equity score of 4 or 5? If no, then no hazard assessment. If yes, then a hazard assessment initiation, looking at existing conditions, and then looking at the analysis, the potentially hazardous conditions sample list. And then if one or more potentially hazardous conditions is identified, then the countermeasures are recommended, and then it goes for director approval. So the high-risk network and high priority racial equity areas allow prioritization of high-risk areas with the most need. Not every development will meet the thresholds that require a traffic study and hazards assessment. But going back to, I'm going to back up just a couple of slides here. On this map right here, I missed the point here I wanted to convey, and that is that we went back and did a sort of a review of the number of active cases, and we know that the majority of the cases that are undergoing a traffic study would be subject to the hazard assessment based off the overlay of this map. And so I'm going to get back to where I was here. Let's see. So projects will still have to meet the requirements of the DCS, even if they aren't subject to the hazard assessment review, which does include these recent updates that we've implemented for bicycle and pedestrian safety. So the proposed change to the DCS includes an addition to the section 202E, where we're saying assessment of potential transportation hazards added as possible topics to be discussed with the city during coordination, and also replacing to include the hazard assessment thresholds, the hazard assessment, and the potentially hazardous conditions table that was included in your memo. And this is the text. I included it, but I won't read through all of it. I included it here primarily for reference. There's the table of potentially hazardous conditions and the mitigation treatments. So we thought it might be helpful to look at a sample case of what a development would look like to be going through the hazard assessment process. So this is a 3-story office building with a parking podium and currently has a surface parking lot and has a history of 1 rear-end crash resulting in injury and uses an existing driveway, the crash located over here adjacent on the arterial street. So the sample case then, the potentially hazardous condition adds a new site access or modifies an existing site access. So no potential mitigation. Increases vehicular volumes crossing sidewalks, paths, or trails. Yes, 1279 additional with 1023 alternative mode trip reduction. So if possible, implement a raised crossing of the eastern driveway access. The potentially hazardous condition here on increasing corner radii, thereby increasing the speed of turns or of pedestrian bicycle crossing distance. So yes, increases radius, reduce corner radius per DCS update should start with a 5-foot radius on local street and designed for the minimum possible radius. This is the good news that we've provided the DCS updates to put those measures into place. Increases the number of travel lanes not present on this condition, particular site condition, so no potential mitigation. Increases crossing distances, yes, increases the corner radius at the existing driveway, which increases the crossing distance. So again, per DCS update should start with a 5-foot radius. Adds unprotected left turn movement, no, so not applicable. Increases the volume of pedestrians, add an uncontrolled mid-block crosswalk. Yes, would likely increase pedestrian traffic access across. So recommend adding enhanced crossing treatments and curb ramps to the existing mid-block crossing per guidance from the pedestrian crossing treatment guidelines. And then adds obstructions or slopes that diminish the sight line between road users. Yes, does not meet alley driveway 15 by 15 sight lines. So modify building or siding or sidewalk alignment to meet the sight distance requirements. So that demonstrates how going through the hazard assessment and the potential mitigation measures could be deployed on a development review project. We took these proposed changes to stakeholders in the community, the Center for People with Disabilities, the Community Cycle Citizen Advisory Committee, as well as to the traffic study and engineering consultants that do a great majority of the work in the community. The Center for People with Disabilities were supportive of the work and provided feedback that they would like to see some of the language to be more inclusive, which we did modify. The traffic study consultants provided feedback that they thought this would actually lead to better traffic analysis and better and more uniform so that their clients who are coming through the process know what to expect. And we appreciate that we were heard from a representative of Community Cycles earlier this evening that they're in support of these modifications and would like to see some additional changes that could be considered for the DCS, but appreciate working with the folks from Community Cycles as we advance this effort to the next level. So the next steps are that we're planning to take this to Planning Board in May and June of 2023, and then as an informational item, as I said, and then to City Council in June and July of 2023. The expectation is that this would go in on a consent agenda item for their recommendation and approval. So that concludes the presentation, and happy to answer any questions you might have about it.
Thanks, Garrett. If anyone has any questions, feel free to hop in.
I have one question. You answered most of my questions, so thank you. That I really appreciate the example too. My question is just in terms of how often these studies were done previously. Will this represent less or more, or is it unknown, or with these new criteria? I guess I'm curious, yeah, how it changes kind of the frequency of this kind of study and analysis.
So I'm joined by fellow team members here that participated. And I think it's important to note here before we respond to that question, I wanted to make this point earlier, but this was a transportation-led effort, not a PNDS-led effort, but appreciate that the staff from PNDS participated in that. And Edward Stafford is here as the Development Engineering Review Manager to speak to the that particular question about the frequency.
Thanks, Garrett, and good evening, TAB members. I would expect this to significantly increase the frequency of a formalized hazard assessment being done. So the previous requirement was rarely triggered, given that it was primarily based on looking backwards with crash data. Whereas this one, given that we've identified very specific areas and very specific requirements, I would expect to see it in a significant number. And we have a very small number of traffic studies on an annual basis, but within those, to see it triggered fairly frequently. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I'll jump in here. That's okay. Thanks, Becky, for that question. That was a much more concise way to ask some of the stuff that I was wondering. So I appreciate that. So if I'm understanding correctly, right now, the traffic study is triggered by just this trip generation. And the change is basically saying whether we'll have to conduct a hazard assessment. Is that right? Do I have that right? Edward's nodding. Looks like I have that right. Okay. So because I was kind of struck by Alexi's comments earlier during the public hearing, saying this is going to reduce sort of the options or the ability of the city to initiate a hazard assessment. And from what Becky and Edward just discussed, it sounds like that's not necessarily the case, that we're probably leaning toward a system and a change from this that is going to make it more uniform, but probably happen more frequently. Is that fair? That's our expectation. Will the director still retain the discretion, I suppose, to ask for a more detailed traffic study that would include this kind of hazard assessment, even if it doesn't meet those two automatic criteria?
Garrett, would you like me to answer that one?
Yes, please.
Certainly. So there's some limited discretion still for the director. If it doesn't meet those items, it may come either from the limited discretion of the DCS or from other criteria in the land use process they may be in. But the intent is to ensure that we have a clarity of when generally these should be acquired, so that the expectations are clear for both the city, the community, and the developer and their engineer.
Okay. So I'm appreciative of that approach. In looking at this, I went back and looked at and listened to the meeting from March where we were looking at the high risk network, and that was our last and first and last look at that excellent work. Devin answered a lot of questions, and there was some talk about going through all of the data, which I've since gone through in the appendices to our packet in that item. So my question, I guess, is that high risk network map finalized now? It's gone to council and been, it was not really requiring council's blessing, but the map that we saw is pretty much the final map, and that's where we're at the moment. Is that correct? Devin's nodding yes. Okay, that's interesting, because when I looked back at the HRN today and yesterday, something really jumped out at me. And it's that there are, we've seen these maps and similar maps through the course of several years and working on Safe Streets reports. And so there are very few kind of surprises about where the hot spots are. But the final HRN, there's a huge hot spot that's sort of missing. And I had this sort of sinking feeling. And I want to know why. So the section of Broadway and Canyon, these major sources of crash data and places, roadways where we are seeing KSI injury crashes. The portion that goes through Central Boulder is not part of the high risk network. And I'm just sort of wondering why.
Yeah, I can try to answer that question, Tila.
Thank you.
Good evening. Devin Joslin, Principal Traffic Engineer. I will likely need to dig into things a little more myself, Tila, to get you a more specific answer. But at its core, the reason is those segments did not have 5 or more of those risk factors. That's the very simple answer. So they, for whatever reason, when we looked at those segments, and I'm trying to pull up the map now for those sections to see just how many they had. But that's essentially what happened there is the risk factors that were selected for the citywide. There were not enough of them on those roadway segments to get them to that 5 or more to put them on the high risk network.
Okay. So specifically, some of my digging around today on this was related to a question I had asked, basically, why were those 6 risk factors selected? And from what I saw, just from the information that was given to us in March, I'm still not certain why those rose to the top. Because we have the crash history for sure on some of those segments. I'm thinking of Broadway and Canyon mostly. And I'm wondering, for instance, like, is that section of Broadway excluded because it is signposted at 25? But the 85th percentile speed being measured up there, I would expect would exceed 30 miles an hour. So I do see the map and the number of risk factors, and that section of Broadway only shows 2 or 3. But I'm not really clear exactly how. So this is probably just one of those cases where the data gives us an answer that's quantifiable and like backed up by reality that doesn't match, in this case, my sort of gut feeling about the dangerousness of that section of road. And I think this is one of those examples where city planning and effort and collecting data and analyzing it is telling us where to more appropriately put our efforts. And so I appreciate that. I actually, have more faith, given all of the effort that I've seen in this high risk network analysis, that you are coming to the right conclusion. But I just, in attempting to figure out whether you were looking at the right things, I wasn't satisfied that we had even asked for analysis in the right sections. So I think there's just more work to be done, and it doesn't have to happen tonight at this meeting, I suppose. But that was the missing links there in the central downtown area, where I know we still have a high number of crashes, and even the work done by the consultants shows large clusters of crashes outside the red study area that the city asked them to focus on, is just making me a little hesitant to basically tie my wagon to this particular map. So that's kind of the source of my consternation at the moment.
One, on the flip side of that, one benefit of tying it to the high risk network that we see is that, keep in mind that this action plan and network will be updated over time. So should a new methodology present itself that identifies new segments that would create a new high risk network that would be mapped, that new high risk network would then be assumed to be part of this process as well, as it changes over time.
Okay. Well, I suppose in the efforts of whoever's, well, Meredith, who's going to be doing the minutes, to more succinctly state my concern, it seemed improbable to me that where Broadway and Canyon and Arapahoe, who are all on the segments that are all on the high risk network, intersect was suddenly not high risk, seemed really just not logical. So
and the other thing I'll say, somewhat in defense of the action plan, is that keep in mind that action plan did also look reactively at crashes that had occurred across the system. So it was both generating the high risk network as a means of being proactive, but also looking at those intersections to check if there had been crash patterns, and if there had been, what types of mitigations would be appropriate that could be woven into the action plan as projects.
Mhm.
So I will tell you that essentially we did look at those locations in the action plan, and projects would have emerged from that review.
Okay, thank you. My last question on this, if I could just go for one more minute, is it's not clear to me in the DCS changes, and maybe this is something standardized elsewhere in the code, but who is paying for the hazard assessment? And what happens if the city staff wants something further or different from whatever the applicant is looking at? Is that already clear somewhere else in the code?
So I can address that when there's a study that's required as a part of a land use application, which a traffic study would be,
Okay.
if triggered, then the applicant is the one responsible for providing that and therefore paying for, and typically they're selecting their consultant and paying. They have to ultimately submit something to us that we're able to determine meets the criteria or the code. And until they get to that point, they won't have a staff recommendation for approval for sure of their project. If we're unable to get to that, we may actually have a different recommendation on their project, either conditions to satisfy or a recommendation of denial.
Okay, I figured, but thank you. I thought I'd ask. Appreciate that. That's it for me.
Thanks, Tina. Trini?
Yeah, I just want to kind of add or hang on to what Tila was saying. Devin, so how far back do you guys look at data to determine? Because I know that last year we had a pretty good year as far as, well, at least as far as fatalities. And so I'm just kind of curious to know how many years back are you guys looking? And if there's like a trending history of crashes, do you guys kind of take that into account? And I guess that's kind of like what Tila was speaking to, that, you know, there's this history there. And even so, even though that we didn't have any incidents, crashes on those particular intersections recently, but we know that that is a problem area, you know, so was that kind of something that you guys took into consideration, or is that something that you guys kind of have like a red flag in these sections that we know are problems and then are just kind of waiting to see? Or, and the second part of my question is, how often are you guys updating the high risk network? I know that maybe Becky addressed that, but it wasn't just.
Good questions. So in terms of the crash history review, what we did for the Vision Zero action plan and what is consistent with what we're proposing for this DCS update is a 5-year review of crash history. In the case of the action plan, we looked at 2016 through 2020 crash data. And then, as you probably are aware, we do essentially monthly tracking of the serious injury and fatal crashes across the system. So we have near real-time tracking of that information from year to year. And then we also have the crash data dashboard that we recently launched, which is a way that the community can view that information as well.
So unfortunately, if a crash happens, then it like pushes that intersection into the high risk network kind of automatically, or?
Not necessarily. So what the high risk network did was it looked for those 5 years of crash data.
Mm-hmm.
What were the contextual factors on the system that kind of led to those crashes occurring? And it was things that were shown in the risk factors that emerged, like having a high volume, having a multi-use path present where there could be high levels of pedestrian or bike activity, are signalized intersections where there are more complex movements and more vehicles moving through the intersection. So those are some examples of the risk factors that emerged from that analysis to create the high risk network.
No, I guess my question was, and I'm sorry, and I'm not going to take any more time. I understand that those are like, that's the criteria to determine if an intersection is or not. But my question is, how quickly does it become part of the high risk network if there's a crash, for example, and it does meet these other, in its short one, for example, what is the process if something horrible happens?
So my understanding of the high risk network is that we developed it in conjunction with the action plan.
Mhm.
And we have set this action plan to be for the next 5 years. So there will not likely be an update or amendment to the high risk network until we're again involved in updating the next action plan, which would come in probably 2027, 2028 timeframe.
Mm. Okay, thank you. There's no way to kind of amend it through if something happens and suddenly we realize that we have an intersection that is truly problematic, that perhaps was lacking one of these 5 elements, and suddenly it just seems kind of.
Well, I think there's a few things at play in your question, and Edward can speak to it too, perhaps a little more involved than I can, but essentially, when there is a crash pattern at an intersection,
Mhm.
you know, that certainly may or may not be an issue for a development or that's proposing to develop. And if it's something that's on our system, we would be tracking that information and would be making adjustments or modifications to that intersection should a crash pattern emerge. That is essentially what we do very proactively and frequently with our left turn phasing. We are almost constantly evaluating where crashes involving left turning vehicles are occurring on our system and deciding where we need to make left turn phasing changes based on the review of crash history at intersections. For segments, it gets a little different, and I don't want to go too in depth here, but it is a little bit different. And then Edward, you know, certainly there are different criteria for what a development does and does not, you know, contribute to as far as when they're developing and what they're responsible for near their site.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more to that. A couple of things to consider. The first is, it is important that we have a well-defensible map or criteria that we use. And so we would have to be cautious about modifications being made that haven't gone through a robust analysis. So we wouldn't want to just be routinely adding and deleting things just for the sake of we think this happened or that happened. That could get us into a bit of a challenge. Another thing to keep in mind is the development itself is responsible to meet the regulations that were in place at the time of their application. So if they applied and 6 months later we made a change to the map and said now it's this, that we can't apply that retroactively. It's not legal. And then finally, Devin does bring up a good point also in terms of how we can utilize the information from this analysis. Ultimately, we do have to be able to show a rational connection or rational nexus to what the development is doing in the area and how it's impacting these items in order to require them to mitigate their impact to it. So just because an intersection may be high crash or may have evolved into one doesn't necessarily one-to-one connect to say, now this new development happening in the area has a responsibility to fix that. So we always have to be cautious about that. And even as we gather the information that will happen in these studies, have to be watching for that rational nexus. And that's just a requirement in the state of Colorado for how we can put requirements onto development.
Yeah, I guess my only addition to that is the priority of all these projects if they're in the high risk network opposed to if they're not. And so it's just, I guess, to do with funding my additional little bit, but that's it. I think it's pretty clear. And thank you.
Thanks, Trini. I've got a couple questions. A lot of this is at the discretion of the director. Which director is it? Is it Director of Planning and Development Services or Director of Transportation and Mobility?
So it's neither in terms of how it's spelled out. And the last DCS update, we defined director, and that's the person who's really been assigned with responsibility over the public works areas by the city manager. Ultimately, that's a determination for the city manager to make under the charter in terms of how staff responsibilities are aligned. It continues to reference public works, is that previous structure had the larger of that. Subsets of that may very well then be delegated to a variety of the directors of what were the public works departments.
Okay, thank you. And then if I followed correctly, that director will identify potential hazards. The consultant will identify mitigation. At that point, is it then up to the director to approve or deny those mitigation strategies? Or does whatever the consultants say hold?
So we will always evaluate what the consultant says. So just because they say something in a study doesn't mean that's necessarily therefore what happens. We will always be looking at, and as we do with any type of development and the different aspects of it, review it for conformance to the requirements in the code. So for example, if they were to come in and suggest a mitigation that we actually did not find was an offset to the hazard that was identified, then we would not approve that. We would send that back to them and say, you didn't get this yet. Here's some ideas, here's some things to think about. So just because they submit it doesn't mean we're done. And all studies, as with all application material, go through a robust review.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Ryan, do you have anything?
Alex, yeah, thanks. I have a few questions. So let's see here. First, picking up on what Teal and Trini had touched on, thinking about the Canyon Broadway area. I'm wondering, I guess I don't really know what's underneath the equity, the definition of the locations for the equity high priorities. And I'm wondering if would that include consideration of unhoused? There would tend to be large populations, and if not, should that be an additional consideration? Maybe it's so specific to transportation from a citywide racial equity index standpoint that maybe that just, I don't know, it's specific to transportation. But I guess maybe I'll just try to put this as a question. Does the team feel like with the principle or the aims of equity that we're doing the right prioritization with consideration, especially of people, well, inclusive of those who are unhoused?
Valerie, I think you probably have the most staff expertise on this, so I guess I would ask if you could share your perspective about Ryan's question.
Yeah, Ryan, thanks for asking about this, and this is a great conversation. I think what I can share is that the methodology for developing the City of Boulder's Racial Equity Index includes several indicators, and so those are percentage of the population that are BIPOC, median income by block group, percentage of the block group population that's living below the poverty line, and also the percentage of the population in that block group that are receiving particular financial aid through Health and Human Services aid programs. So it's a combination of factors creating that index, and probably does in general cover some of your questions. And part of the rationale for us using the city's racial equity index in this methodology is to identify areas in the city that may have been traditionally underinvested in terms of transportation infrastructure and focus.
Thanks, Valerie. Okay, so I think what the thesis was, it's not clear that the current mapping that's been given from the racial equity index covers unhoused populations, because by definition, this is where people are domiciled with permanent addresses. And so I think it's beyond what I can offer feedback on to do anything about that, but I might just make that observation that it's that might explain some of the questions that people are having about what about this location. So maybe it's for a further discussion with the team working on the equity index to think about impacts of unhoused with Vision Zero. So okay, I'll leave it at that. I had a couple other questions though. Let's see here. So Teal was kind of getting at this, and sorry if I'm being redundant. But I'm thinking, so it makes sense to me that that there's a prioritization of high-risk network inequity, 100%. But also, it sure would be nice to have as much comprehensive coverage of this everywhere. You know, anywhere it's above 100 vehicles an hour. You know, there could be places where there's developments that might be coming in the future that aren't really covered here. But also, I guess, just more generally, like if whether or not it's in a high risk network or an equity priority area, if we have large traffic volumes, significant traffic volumes, it would be nice. I think it would be nice to cover it if we could. So I imagine there's resource considerations here. I guess what I would try to say this as a question is, could you imagine expressing to council through your recommendations something like a desire or a scenario to make it as comprehensive as possible, and if you know, beyond the prioritization of high risk network inequity, but to move towards comprehensiveness, and if it would take resources to do that, then to express what that would take. I mean, maybe you can't answer that off the cuff, but if you can, great. If not, I'll just sort of leave it for consideration. Okay, big question. Or, sorry, Garrett, go ahead. Looks like you're.
Yeah. So, I guess I'll chime in on that, Ryan. So I think that the direction that was given to us from council was to explicitly give consideration to the crash analysis to Vision Zero, racial equity, and transportation master plan goals. So that's what we've endeavored to do. And I guess we want to be mindful that we have a protocol here for the hazard analysis that has some rigor, and that if we were to open it up to say every traffic study is subject to it, then does it I guess hold the same level of rigor. That I discussing this with Edward earlier today about some of the autonomy or latitude that a director may have. It sounds like if, as part of site review and development review, and Edward, you might want to be kicking me virtually as I talk right now, so feel free to chime in if I'm saying anything out of order. But it sounds to me like as projects come in that are of significant interest, and it appears that a hazardous condition may be present, that the director does retain the authority to impose the hazard assessment as part of a traffic study, even if it's not in the equity area or adjacent to a high-risk network.
And generally, I would agree with that, with the caveat, of course, being that, you know, we still have to have a defendability to that, and we could be challenged and could lose a challenge if we aren't able to defend what the reason and why it's really associated with that proposed development project.
Okay. I first of all, on so just a quick follow-up or two. On the question of what responding to the direction the council gave, yeah, that does seem important here. So I'm just reading the memo, and I'm just seeing that it says, I'm on page 2, kind of near the middle, that should be consistent with the Vision Zero, racial equity, and transportation master plan goals. So I had sort of taken it as you had more discretion to just sort of implement this framework. If that's the case, that might be worth consideration. But if I'm missing more, I guess, direct code that says, or direction, then that's fine. But it sounds like that might be a question. Okay. And then I guess I would just offer one other thought, which is, yeah, I can I can see how I mean, this is a resource prioritization matter, like many things. So I'm not sure what diluting would, like, if there would be a real risk of dilution of like the purpose or the effectiveness provided that you had enough resources. So it still seems to me like it might be worth saying, or at least somehow sharing the idea that we are gonna, we're gonna roll this thing out, and if it's working, and if this seems like it's a good method, we'll be interested to consider expanding it just to, towards our Vision Zero goals. Devin may have thoughts on why not do exactly that way, but just in general, it seems like if this is useful, we could scale it up. I guess I think it's exciting, so I'll just share that. I think that's it, actually, unless there's any questions or anything you want to follow up on, Garrett or Valerie or anybody.
Ryan, appreciate your comments. And as we will be meeting a staff again before this advances to council. So we can certainly take your comments as well as all the others we've heard this evening and talk about possible revisions before it makes its way to council.
Great. Okay, thanks. This is really exciting. I'm grateful for the work that Garrett and the team are doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo what Ryan said, and thanks, Garrett, Devin, and Edward for joining us tonight. With that, we'll move on to the next matter from staff, which I believe is going to be Valerie providing an update on the e-bike incentive program.
All right, let me get my screen share going. Are you seeing my full presentation?
Yep.
All right. So good evening. I'm Valerie Watson, Transportation Planning Manager, and I'm joined tonight by Sydney Schieffer, Senior Transportation Planner. This summer, the City of Boulder will offer a financial incentive to residents to expand access to e-bikes in Boulder. This is a partnership between Transportation and Mobility and climate initiatives. Our goal is to better understand the demand and impact of e-bikes in Boulder, especially as e-bike incentives become more prevalent throughout Colorado. Climate Initiative staff briefed the Environmental Advisory Board last week, and we are pleased to offer this update to TAB this evening. So what is considered an e-bike for this incentive? An e-bike is an electric motorized bicycle with a rechargeable battery and an electric motor that gives riders a boost as they pedal. That pedal assist offers more accessible way to cycle through tougher terrain and travel further distances. Other benefits of e-bikes include reducing emissions and increasing personal savings when we replace car trips with e-bike trips, as well as the health benefits of pedaling a bicycle and turning car trips into enjoyable bike rides. There are two main types of e-bikes that will be incentivized: a standard or general e-bike and an e-cargo bike. General e-bikes are great for commuting to work or school, while e-cargo bikes offer a larger variety of uses such as transporting kids, pets, and groceries. So how will the incentives work? Those interested in a voucher would apply online to enter a random selection for a limited number of vouchers. A voucher recipient would then take their voucher for an upfront discount on the sale price of a qualifying e-bike at a pre-approved participating Boulder County bike shop. Bike shops will then be reimbursed by the city for the discount after the sale. The voucher amounts are split into 4 categories: standard income general e-bikes, standard income e-cargo bikes, income qualified general e-bikes, and income qualified e-cargo bikes. The amounts for each voucher category are based on the success of the Denver e-bike incentive program. Income qualified voucher recipients will have the option to receive a starter kit voucher to purchase safety equipment such as helmets, child seats, and high quality locks. To receive a voucher, City of Boulder residents will first register and complete the online application process. Applicants will have approximately 2 weeks to complete the application. providing time for technical issues or questions to be answered, and determining what kind of voucher that they would like to apply for, and to receive any necessary assistance prior to the application due date. When the application due date arrives, we will then conduct a random selection for each voucher category to identify who would be awarded that limited number of vouchers. Those who are selected to receive a voucher will then finalize their application by uploading their proof of Boulder residency. If they are receiving an income qualified voucher, they will upload the necessary documentation at that time. Once the recipient is verified, they will receive their voucher and will be able to select from a list of approved Boulder County bike shops from which to purchase an e-bike. And this is a point of sale voucher, meaning that the voucher recipients will receive their discount when they purchase their e-bike, reducing their out-of-pocket cost. City staff have worked with Community Cycles and a focus group of Boulder County bicycle shops to ensure that this process works smoothly for the bike shops too. We are planning on 2 release dates for vouchers this summer, likely in July and September. The first release will be for 200 vouchers, evenly split between the 4 voucher categories. The purpose of this is to gauge interest in the incentives for each category and adjust as needed for the second release. We will maintain a minimum number of income qualified vouchers and work with several community partners to ensure those in our community with the most need for financial and technical support can participate in the voucher application process. All right, here's the webpage address to find tons of more information about the e-bike incentives. And city staff are still working on building out the application system and will be updating our website with more detailed information about the application process for the public later this spring. We will also be sure to share our public materials once available and ask for your help in distributing those through your channels in your role as board members when the time comes. And now we're available to take your questions.
Thanks, Valerie. Any tab members have any questions for Valerie or Sydney?
Do you want to go
Sheila?
first, Sheila? Yeah.
Sure, Trini.
Well, I just had a couple questions regarding like the bike shops, how, if there's a process for them to, like, once the program gets going, if they hadn't heard, I mean, is there an application process? You said there was a selection process that you guys went through, but.
Yeah, that's right. We are really pleased that we were able to partner with Community Cycles to do a bunch of outreach already with most of the bike shops in Boulder County, and expanding beyond the bike shops just in the city of Boulder to those in the county, so that folks have a lot of different types of e-bikes to choose from. Most, if not all, of the bike shops that we reached out to and participated in the focus groups that we held in partnership with Community Cycles are very excited about the program and are likely to opt in. And so as we continue to build out that back end that I mentioned, we will then formalize those relationships with the bike shops, and they will be a part of the program. And once we have that final list, we will put that on our website.
That's great. Thank you, Valerie. And I guess my last question has to do with the vouchers that you have to qualify for. Did you say that there were an equal number of vouchers?
Yeah, we'll have 2 releases of vouchers this year. The first release will have equal numbers of vouchers that will be released across those 4 categories. So standard bike for general income, and then e-Kogra bike, as well as the 2 categories for income qualified. So looking to do about 200 vouchers in that initial release. From there, we will understand the demand across the different voucher types, and then adjust for the second release later this year.
I guess my only feedback would be that I think we should provide more vouchers for the income qualified Then
Yeah, and so it's kind of a combination of number of vouchers, but also the amount of vouchers, the actual dollar amount of each voucher. What I think will happen after we gauge that interest from the initial release, it will show us how we will maximize the amount of vouchers that we can set aside for those lower income categories.
and make sure that they are aware that these are available to them, because I think that's going to be crucial for the
Yeah, would it be helpful to hear about the outreach and engagement we'll be doing this year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're partnering with our consultant that's working with us on the back end of the system, as well as Community Cycles, to do outreach to a bunch of different community-based organizations and agencies in the county. We'll be hosting several workshops where folks can learn about the application process and what's required and involved. And all of these are really focused on getting participation in those income qualified categories.
That's great. Thank you, Valerie.
Tila?
Thank you. Thanks, Valerie. And I had a similar reaction. I bet Ryan does too, sort of to the idea that there would be an equal number of vouchers distributed in the first round. Because, the way I'm looking at the numbers, for one, non-income qualified cargo bike, we could be giving 4 more people a standard e-bike for income qualifications. So, and that's something that I think we should be prioritizing a bit. In addition to income qualifications, have you considered extra categories like people with a disability or over a certain age limit? Because one of the more fundamental revolutionary results of this e-bike revolution have been that people who normally might not be physically capable of doing their standard bike ride due to age or disability find that they can. And that would be a population that we could maybe urge out of their cars or whatever their alternate modes of transportation are. And we ought to be thinking of prioritizing accessibility and availability of these vouchers for that kind of population.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thinking about people with disabilities as well as aging in place, our older adults, we will adaptive e-bikes are an eligible bike type with these vouchers for any of the categories. So we certainly want to encourage folks to purchase adaptive bikes. And we've actually talked with the bike shop owners in Boulder County to make sure that they are able to order those if they don't just happen to have adaptive e-bikes, on the floor for sale. And they've confirmed that they can order those relatively easily and quickly as part of this program. So it is certainly a consideration and something we'll focus on in our engagement and outreach as well.
But it's not going to be part of the application process or consideration for who gets what.
No, it's not necessarily prioritized in the the random selection, but it is an eligible type of bike.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by an adaptive e-bike.
Yeah, adaptive e-bikes come in all different kinds of forms and varieties. Something that would be commonly known as an adaptive e-bike might be a trike, a tricycle, 3 wheels, maybe sits more upright. There are many other types of adaptive bicycles that can be purchased or custom designed. And so it depends on the need of the individual user. But we wanted to make sure that we were specifically clear that those were eligible bicycle types, whereas say a souped up mountain bike is not an eligible bike type.
Okay, well, what if it's allowing a 75-year-old person to mountain bike like they usually do? I find the category is a little overly prescriptive because there is a pretty robust market in after sale modification of these bikes. I have an e-bike myself, which I got because I have a son with a disability who cannot ride a bike. I looked high and low for cargo bikes, and he was terrified to ride any of the cargo bikes. So my e-bike is a bike, and I had to buy a separate $900 trailer from a company in Canada that fits a larger person. So my bike is an adaptive e-bike, but it's not sold as that category. That's not what, that's, and when I ride it around on my own, it's not an adaptive e-bike. And so I would really just prefer that we make an e-bike in whatever form it is more available to people who want them and need them, and we are fairly confident will ride them. And so rather than saying, well, what flavor of bike do you want? And then, you're number 26 out of 25 vouchers because you didn't pick the right category, seems an unfortunate consequence of trying to be just like overly prescriptive on what the kinds of bikes it is that we're subsidizing here. I think that we should be subsidizing for people who need them and will use them. And we should be defining a little bit more broadly what those bikes might look like, and who might qualify or might deserve some help and a boost for acquiring that. I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Tila. I have just one question. I know we won't know how many total incentives there will be available in the second go around, but how will the total pool of money compare to the first go around? Will they be comparable or different?
There will be a bit more in that second go around. That's why we're having that smaller offering in the first.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we're targeting about, our goal really is to issue about 500 of the different voucher types this year. That's the goal we've established, and then we'll gauge from the first release how the second release will look.
Okay, thanks. Trini?
And just a last question. So are you guys gonna fund a specific type of e-bike? There's different types of e-bikes. So like the full throttle, are you going to differentiate between them, or is it just basically if it's a cargo bike or I guess that's just my question. If this funding is going to be available for a full throttle bike, for example.
Yeah, thanks. There's a lot of information on our website that kind of goes through which types of e-bikes are eligible for this incentive. Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes are eligible.
Oh,
and that has to do with the differences in the miles per hour and when the pedal assist cuts out and things like that. And all of that is detailed on our website.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else from Tab?
I had a few things. Okay, great. This is really exciting, and I'm exciting to see Madeline, my kid's name up there. Thanks for publishing her. I don't know if folks noticed that. That was her art in the back, my 7-year-old. Okay, so I have a couple comments. One picking up on what Tila was talking about, but Valerie, maybe I'll just ask first a question or two, maybe two. I think 2 questions. So the first question is about the surveys. So I know that e-bikes are life-changing. And I know also that people who haven't ridden them are very skeptical. They tend to be. And there's 2 kinds of people. I'm being a little blunt, but people that have tried riding an e-bike and haven't, and experienced bionic power. Again, I'm being a little bit coarse here, but I am just wondering, I'm thinking about the surveys and imagining that when this first phase of work is done and it's time to consider the possibility of additional public investment in this kind of a program. What are the questions that we will have really wanted to answer in those surveys that will put to rest people's questions about the efficacy of these vehicles to replace car trips or to be helpful or to serve other objectives that we agree are objectives once they fly off the shelves? Oh, it's a big question, and maybe you don't have an off the cuff answer, but I have to ask. I have to ask.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the goals of the offering this year with the e-bike incentive is to understand how it can contribute to our transportation and climate goals. And Sydney, I wonder if you could add in a little bit more about what we're thinking in terms of the survey that we're going to be building out.
Yeah, so we were able to receive Denver's survey. So kind of starting on that basis of, you know, how many miles per week do you typically ride your e-bike and that kind of stuff. We want to add questions like, do you experience joy? Does it improve your, like the joy factor? Does it improve your physical health? And then also, you know, what did you ride previously to your e-bike? So we can kind of get a sense of, okay, were these primary like cyclists and then they switched to an e-bike? Were they car drivers and then switched to an e-bike? So yeah, it's still in development. And if you have suggestions for questions, I'd love to tie you in on that.
When does it have to be, when is it baked, the survey questions?
I'm not quite sure on the due date of that. Right now, we're focusing on building up the portal and getting the application process complete.
Okay, I would offer then for now, I think you should try, okay, so you ask, so I think you should try to find your skeptics, especially in city government, in the elected boards, or the elected city council, and find the people who think that, why are we wasting our money on these things? And ask them, what would help them believe that these things are replacing car trips, they're actually giving people legitimate mobility miles, they're going to be used, that sort of a thing. I would give the Denver survey, it's worth a look. But it's not worth much to me that they have their questions. I wouldn't trust it necessarily. I would look at the point of the survey as, what do we want to know as Boulder that's going to help us to reinvest or not to, or you know, to change gear later, and not just sort of like kind of sleepwalk through that, just using what they have. So that's my advice. And if you want me to point you to some people who I can discreetly tell you would be good customers, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ryan.
Great. Okay, I think I had another question. No, actually, oh yeah. So sorry, I do have a question. So e-bike. So it's the eligible bikes are basically any bike that you can buy at an eligible bike shop. So that right, and so the bike shops will have to become registered, and then it's just kind of anything that they carry is up for grabs.
As long as it meets the criteria, they're listed on our website, class 1 and class 2, and kind of fit the general description of what we're classifying as eligible, correct?
Okay. Okay, great. Then I think that's my questions. I'll just, if I get opportune comment. One is on what Tila was saying. I think it's a good point about the challenge of, or I guess one of the drawbacks of categorizing. So, you know, and having just a couple of tiers of pricing. I know it's tricky to come up with a list for an administrative program like this, and because you just have to be precise. And so there's an advantage of making it simple, you know, just to avoid gaming and so on. So I know there's some back end considerations. I do though, after I hear Tila talk, it makes me think about what about the merits of just a percentage off MSRP. So then you kind of, it's more of a continuous function. It's just, I don't know what the kind of average was in there, maybe as a quarter or something. You maybe thought of this, but if you could tell people, yeah, it's 25% off MSRP or 30%, and then there's a little more uncertainty on like exactly what's going to happen. But I mean, there's uncertainty anyway with this. So probably thought of that, but it off the cuff, that feels like kind of interesting, and also maybe a more a more efficient type of a rebate, because then people who are getting higher end bikes that are going to last longer and need less maintenance are going to, you know, people are more likely to buy those, and so on. So I have one more comment, but Valerie, you're nodding. So I don't know, do you want to say anything or?
You know, I really appreciate that question or comment, Ryan. And the only thing I would add is, you know, we are basing a lot of the program parameters on the Denver program, because we had to act so swiftly this year in order to get everything going, contracting in place and all of that, to be able to have an offering this calendar year. And so we're really resting on the success of the Denver program. And one of the things we did kind of ground truth in our focus groups with bike shops is what are the typical price ranges for standard and e-cargo bikes, so that we could understand truly if we used the Denver model in terms of the amount of the voucher amounts that they have landed on and iterated over time truly. What would be the real out-of-pocket cost for someone in the standard voucher versus the income qualified voucher? And some feedback that we heard from the community connectors and residents, we were very fortunate to be able to meet with that group and get some feedback in terms of questions just like this, was that the out-of-pocket cost is really important. And so we did really want to ground truth that, especially for the income qualified vouchers, that the out-of-pocket cost would still be something that is attainable. And so I think, that is something that we looked at, but I appreciate your other idea for maybe looking at percentage off or something that is even more marketable. And I think that's really the beauty of the offering this year, is that we'll learn a lot from how it goes, for future incentive offerings.
Okay, that's good. And I appreciate you hearing me out and understand that, yeah, you're moving quickly. But yeah, I like the openness to it. I think, the e-bikes do so many different things for so many different kinds of people, and the products and the technology is changing. And so that might be a nice direction in the future, at least to look at. The one other thing I wanted to do is just provide my suggestion that I know I said this before, or repeat it. So I also know that with administration programs like this, you need some simplicity, notwithstanding that you're trying to copy what Denver's done, but also that in just in general, you need simplicity so people can understand it. But I still think is something that deserves strong consideration is prioritizing these vouchers to staff of the city, to public workers of the city and of BVSD, and possibly, of course, these are residents. They have to meet as resident criteria, possibly of RTD and or the University Administration, with the reasoning that if you're thinking about what we're trying to do for our community, Boulder can only benefit if we have more people who are making decisions about Boulder, who are outside of their motor vehicles and moving around and having that chance. So I would love to see these all go to staff. But I know that your staff, so it's sort of weird maybe to say that. If that's possible to put into consideration, like you could really look at that, you feel like you could actually consider that. I would offer to tell council, hey, this was Tab's idea. They asked us, they forced us to tell you the argument. But again, I understand that it may complicate things too much. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Ryan. Becky, did you have anything else?
No, nothing for me. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Valerie.
Alex,
and Sydney.
could I just revisit one point, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Tila, back to your earlier comments about adaptive e-bikes. I just wanted to acknowledge that, that's a very personal comment for you from your own personal experience and lived experience. Something that the Denver program found over time, they initially did not have any kind of provisions for adaptive e-bikes. And since in the last, I guess it's about a year and a half, and Sydney, correct me if I'm wrong, or more, that their program has been rolling. I think they discovered a need to really, recognize that is a particular kind of market in the e-bike realm, and in terms of how people move around. So they now have, kind of a partnership where they work with organizations to identify potential voucher applicants and, kind of help them go through the application process. And so that's something that we are, very much aware of. And part of what we're doing for the city of Boulder and worked really hard to set up for this year is the technical assistance piece. So we've partnered with Community Cycles to offer a lot of technical assistance to community members who need help and guidance, as well as the other consultant that's working with us on developing the back end of the whole portal for the application process. and we'll be conducting a lot of the workshops. And so this is something I just wanted to acknowledge from your comment is a consideration that I hope we can also address through our outreach and engagement process in how we generate interest in the application. But I just wanted to thank you for raising that consideration tonight, and we will certainly think more about your comments and feedback.
Thank you, Valerie. I really appreciate that. In thinking about the outreach while this conversation's been going on, I was, going to send an email, but I might as well just say it now, but it might be useful to try to tap into people like occupational therapists, physical therapists, and people who work with people recovering from injury, people dealing with aging in place. You already mentioned that, so you're probably thinking of, some of the senior center kind of service providers, but this is of interest to a surprisingly broad segment of our population and not our usual suspects who necessarily will receive the information. And so getting in the knowledge to the service providers who might see the clients who might be more in need of or interested in these kinds of devices would be probably helpful.
Thank you, Tila.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to add to Tila, maybe DRCOG has a good list for aging in place that they could supply. That's all.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be transformative for many people. So it's very exciting that this program is up and running after, I know TAB's been advocating for this for a while, and it took until now for there to be capacity in the work plan to get this going, but it's glad to hear this is going. So thanks, Valerie, and thanks, Sydney, for your info tonight. Valerie, are there any other matters from staff?
Not this evening. No, thanks.
Cool. With that, we'll move on to matters from the board. I didn't see anything on the agenda other than open board comments. I'll start by just mentioning that we have our retreat tomorrow night, the annual TAB retreat. Agenda will look pretty different from last year. We'll start with an icebreaker and then talk about how the department is using the racial equity tools. As board members, we've been invited to go through some racial equity training. That's not what we're doing tomorrow. Those will be separate sessions. So this, I think, will just be more of an overview of how the department's using it and things to be mindful of for us moving forward. And then from there, we'll get into a conversation on policy ideas and areas of emphasis. And I think it'd be great if each board member could have one of each. Policy ideas, that's more things that we could suggest to council. And for those to find their way into the work plan, it might have to wait until the new council is seated and they have their retreat early next year. That would be an opportunity for some big things to come into play via council. And then the areas of emphasis are more about how we operate in the coming year, themes to be mindful of. Does anyone have any questions about the retreat prep for tomorrow night? Let's see, Tila has a comment that she might be running a little bit late. So yeah, if everyone could have one of each, hopefully we can be concise in describing those to help keep the conversation moving. And if there's nothing else on that, are there any other open board comments from TAB tonight? Trini?
Just really, really quick. I don't know how many of you guys know, but SB 23200 passed. So it's now it's sitting on the governor's desk. There's a slight chance that he may not sign it. So this is for the automated traffic enforcement. It gives municipalities the capability of using cameras if they choose to. So if you have a moment, please reach out to the governor and ask him to sign it. It's so important and so much work has gone into it, and really it's not the first time that it's been introduced or something similar. So please help. And yeah, I know that the city is a huge proponent for the bill, and yeah. That's
Thanks, Jenny.
all I have to say.
Thanks,
We'll
Trini.
do
That
more of
was
that.
that was what I was going to bring up. Specifically, the camera bill allows speed cameras on high-speed arterials, so it removes that small residential below 30-mile-an-hour limit. So that's a good thing. Yeah, I hadn't heard that there's a chance Polis might not sign it, so sure, we can send an email.
Yeah, so please.
Yeah,
It
thank
would
you.
be very, very helpful.
Thanks. Any other open board comments? Ryan?
Alex, on the airport, just a couple of things, the airport working group. There's not a lot that's new. I've been to, there was an open house and another meeting, working group meeting that I attended after our last call, after our last month's meeting. Not a ton of new issues from that to share. It was people kind of sharing different points of feedback. I don't know if there's much strategic from that discussion. But I would also say that I've spent some time with Laura Kaplan from Planning Board, Phil Ogren from HAB, Housing Board, and with Allison, we've had a couple of discussions. And I think to me, what seems like really the kind of big issue for us, not the exclusive one, but really the big consideration is, from a transportation standpoint, is there a future for that site that involves a transit-oriented development instead of airport, or in part instead of? And one of the things that HAB and Planning Board, those liaisons are, I would say, leading on is advocating, and I think even creating to bring about some kind of a vision for what a scenario could look like. Not to advocate for a housing scenario per se, but to say that as we go through this process, the community considering this should have something that they're looking at when they're thinking about the idea of an alternative to the airport, rather than just an abstraction. And so anyway, they're working on that. There may be more feedback to share, but I thought I'd tell you that. The second thing is there was a letter that the FAA staff person, I think the regional lead based in Denver, sent to the city that went to City Manager Nuria, and I believe shared with council, that sort of said, we've heard something, I'm paraphrasing here, but something along the lines of, we've heard you've been talking about consideration of uses of the space beyond the airport. Just to remind you, you have a legal contract with us. That's more or less a thesis statement. And I think you might look at it and say they're just helping us to make sure we have the facts. The community has the facts in writing, and so that goes into this. And then my question becomes, not to look too far ahead, but the FAA is one of about 20 plus offices and bureaus and desks within US DOT. And I think I understand that all of those units report up to the Deputy Secretary, who is Polly Trottenberg, and a former New York City Transportation Commissioner. So anyway, just leave it at that. Leave it at that as far as observations go. So that's it for the sort of report, except that the next meeting is June 7th, and I'm going to be out of town and not able to attend. So it's from 4:30 to 6:30 at the OSMP hub. That's in city limits. It's not at the airport. It's in city limits. I think I forgot actually. I think Tila, you were the vice liaison, and I think Alex you stepped up after that at one point. But Tila, Alex, any interest in joining that one?
Can you say the date again? June
7th, 4:30 to 6:30. It's in person.
Let me check.
We have a strict in-person policy for this one.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. Okay. I'll make the arrangements. Thanks for doing that. And that's all I have unless anybody has any questions or anything else on the airport.
Not seeing any. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks for filling in, Tila. Any other comments tonight? Don't see any hands. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
I second.
All those in favor? I can't see hands, so let me know if it's not unanimous.
5 out of 5.
Awesome. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and I'll see Tab, maybe a little bit of staff and whoever from the community is interested in joining us at our retreat tomorrow night. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. See you tomorrow.